Right,
So,
right.
yeah.
And how difficult is it to become a mandated refugee? What does that mean? Like, it'd be good for people to understand that.
Yeah, mandated refugee is like when the person in charge, the officers in charge of UNHCR, decide somebody as a refugee under the definition of refugee. So they're a person who were forced to flee from their country because of the persecution based on their political view, their sexual identity, all this stuff. So here's the tricky point about that thing is majority of the refugees population have difficulty for literacy. So what I mean by that, especially from my community, 80% of the people illiterate and they don't know how to write in English, they don't know how to speak in English. So the first step to be able to get recognized as a refugee is you need to write application and send it to UNHCR. So even then, because we have limitation of the people, how many people they are going to grant refugees in this particular year or their budget year or their month, and the application that they receive every day is a lot too many, because there are people from different countries around the world who came to Malaysia and seeking asylum and seeking to get protection from UNHCR. So that the first challenge is to even write an application. And the second challenge is, unlike other countries from different part of the world, Malaysia UNHCR didn't have, to my knowledge, I don't know for right now, today, didn't have that platform between the communities, the refugee communities and UNHCR to be able to get access to services and the information from UNHCR very easily, by which like they can just pop into the door of UNHCR and just saying that, hey, I just came to this country, I want to apply for it. And if there's any form that I can fill up for, or if there's any interpretation and translation service that I can get right on the spot to fill up this particular form. So that's when I see many people from Burma, particularly Rohingya peoples, when they came to Malaysia, because of this difficulty, they end up being undocumented at least for 5 years, 6 years, and 7 years, not being able to send even that application. So this is the first. And after they are able to send application to UNHCR, UNHCR has that whole pile of application, I don't know how many thousands. So they're gonna pull up those letters and they're gonna call particular people, seeing the condition, the urgency, and they're gonna call you. And then when you get called, you have to go for those interviews with UNHCR officers. So here's another thing. So if you have never been interviewed by those kind of setting, with like having an officer and interpreter, and oftentimes what I found out is that people get really nervous and they don't know how to answer that particular question, although they had faced persecution in their own country. So they can't give you that particular answer at that moment. So if the officers are gonna make decision based on that one particular interview or two interviews, it's very tricky. How do we know that this person is eligible to be a refugee by those interviews? That another challenge that the people face. Then they have to wait and wait and wait until they get determination from UNHCR to grant asylum seekers status. Then they have to wait for a few years, a couple of years, to become refugees again. And they have to go for another interview called refugee status determination. We call it RSD. So at that interview, they're gonna have a long interview to finalize if you're eligible to become a refugee. So those are several steps that we have to go through.
So this massive, it's such a complex system for anybody to navigate, let alone somebody who has low literacy levels or is suffering trauma or has got, little funds behind them or anything like that, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So there are some parallels there, I hear, when you're talking like with the asylum process in New Zealand as well, asylum seeking process in New Zealand, in terms of, being in that setting of having to be interviewed and the stresses there. And yeah. So, and once people go through those processes, so like you say, the 1% might go through those processes and might be lucky to have support to go through those processes or be able to do it themselves. And then they get told, you know, congratulations, you're going to Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So how does that process happen? And then can you kind of give us a little bit about how that felt for you?
Well, yeah, to be honest with you, there has been so many frustration, and I was almost giving up because I kept applying for resettlement since 2001 when I first became refugee in Malaysia. So I kept applying for that, kept sending application, email after email, post by post, post by post. Until 2015, I didn't hear anything at all. I didn't receive an email saying that, well, we received your email, or we have received your letter, we're gonna process or think about it or consider about it. So that's really discouraging, and living as a refugee in a country where we don't have many rights because we're not recognized in that country, it's really stressful. Mm-hmm. So as you have mentioned, refugees already have a lot of stress and trauma when they flee from their country. And plus, living in another country, in the hosting country, with so much of restriction and hardship without any legal protection, so many stuff are adding so many frustration and anxiety and stress again. So it's like very, very long process and with a lot of uncertainty. So it's the same process again. You have to send several applications again and again, again and again. They're gonna read some of those applications and see who should be prioritized for particular reasons. And they will interview you and they will refer you to the country, resettling country. Yeah, about 21 countries in the world right now taking the refugees. So when they refer you to those countries, you have to wait until the immigration of those countries coming down to Malaysia to interview you. Right. Because you need to have that immigration interview to get decision from that particular country to tell you that now we can accept you as a safe and sound resident to our country.
Okay. Because
there has a lot of security check and background check to see if it's going to be safe to bring this person to our country. So that's a long wait again.
Oh my goodness. And then finally, you were told you're accepted to go to New Zealand. And then how long was it before you actually got on the plane too?
That's a very good question. So I get my interview by Immigration New Zealand in October 2016, and I waited until 2018 January to get a decision letter from Immigration New Zealand saying that you are accepted. Then I have to wait another year until January 2019 to be on plane and be in New Zealand. Really. Wow.
And that whole time from the time you were accepted by New Zealand, the New Zealand government to, and the time between then and getting on the plane, was your safety in the community secure at that point, in the community in Malaysia, for example?
There is no guarantee, like I have mentioned. If you are found walking in the country, it's illegal because we don't have those right to walk. So we all walk because UNHCR from Malaysia doesn't pay for your rent, doesn't pay for your food. So we need to eat, we need a place to sleep. So although we are aware of those risks, we still have to walk. And I am very fortunate and very lucky that I was working for the agencies that deal with refugees and sort of NGOs and INGOs. So I am not on the street like other refugees. I am not on the wet market doing all those hard labor. I am at least under those roof of INGO and NGOs and in that office. Okay. So my risk level is lower compared to those people who have to take risks every single day to feed their families, to feed their children, to feed their wives. So just imagine.